Jake Thompson shifted uncomfortably in his seat as the massive lecture hall buzzed with alien chatter. The chair wasn't built for humans, and his legs had gone numb 20 minutes ago. Around him, towering figures cast long shadows across the amphitheater-style seating. Some had multiple arms, others floated in containment suits, and a few glowed with their own inner light. 6 months into his exchange program at Kepler Station Xenobiology Academy, Jake still felt like a kid who'd wandered into the wrong classroom. At 22, he was supposedly one of Earth's brightest xenobiology students, but here he felt tiny and out of place. The other students were easily twice his size, some 3 times larger. Their conversations sounded like a mix of whale songs, clicking sounds, and musical notes that hurt his ears. The professor, Dr. Veltar, stood at the front of the class like a living crystal sculpture. Her body was made of what looked like clear quartz, refracting the lecture hall's lights into rainbow patterns on the walls. When she moved, tiny chimes seemed to ring from somewhere inside her crystalline form. Jake had learned that Zephyrians like her were considered one of the most peaceful species in the galaxy. They lived for thousands of years and spent most of their time studying philosophy and art. "Attention, students!" Dr. Veltar's voice rang out like someone tapping a wine glass. The alien chatter died down immediately. Jake noticed how all the other students sat up straighter, their various forms of attention focused on her. Some had multiple eyes that all turned toward the front. Others had sensory organs that Jake couldn't even identify. Jake pulled out his tablet, the same basic model he'd used back at Colorado State University. It looked ancient compared to the floating hollow displays and thought interface devices the other students used. A few of the aliens near him glanced at his primitive technology with what might have been curiosity or pity. He couldn't tell which. "Today marks a special day in our curriculum," Dr. Veltar continued, her crystalline face somehow managing to look excited despite being made of stone. "We will observe a living specimen of a Class 7 predator, the Shadow Maw from Rim Colony 12. The reaction was immediate. Jake felt the temperature in the room seem to drop as every alien student went rigid with fear. The floating ethereals actually moved backward, their gaseous forms clustering together like scared children. The insectoid clixions' antennae dropped flat against their heads, and the reptilian Sauron scales changed color to muted grays and browns. Jake blinked and looked around, confused. He'd been in Dr. Veltar's class for 3 months now, and they'd studied plenty of dangerous creatures. There were the acid-spitting meltlings from Sector 9, the giant tentacle krakenfish from the water world of Aquatica, and those electric eel things from the Storm Planet. The other students had been nervous during those lessons, sure, but nothing like this. A low humming sound filled the air as the room's containment systems activated. Force field generators built into the walls started glowing with blue energy. Jake had never seen them turn on before. Whatever they were about to see, the station security systems were taking it seriously. Now, Dr. Veltar said, her voice taking on a soothing tone like a mother comforting frightened children. "I assure you all that the containment protocols are more than adequate. The Shadow Maw will be held in a Class A force field, the same type used to contain stellar material in our reactor cores." This didn't seem to comfort anyone. If anything, the students looked more terrified. Jake noticed that several of the smaller aliens had actually started quietly moving toward the exits. A group of the ethereals had bunched together so tightly they looked like one big cloud. Jake opened his tablet and started taking notes, just like he would in any other class back home. He wrote Shadow Maw, Class 7 Predator, from Rim Colony 12 at the top of his page. He wondered what made it so much scarier than the other creatures they'd studied. Maybe it was bigger, or had some kind of psychic abilities. Some alien predators could mess with your mind. He'd learned. As he wrote, Jake became aware of the stairs. Dozens of alien eyes, sensors, and other detection organs were focused on him. The 4-armed tetrapod sitting next to him had actually scooted his chair away. Jake looked up from his tablet to find a ring of empty space around him as the other students had quietly moved to different seats. "What?" he whispered to the tetrapod, whose name was something unpronounceable but meant Swift River in his language. Swift River's 4 eyes blinked in sequence as he stared at Jake like he'd just announced he was going to juggle live grenades. "Human," he said in heavily accented Galactic Standard. "Are you not afraid?" The containment field had been humming quietly in the background for the past 10 minutes. A low electrical buzz at Jake barely noticed. He'd grown up near power lines back in Ohio, so the sound was almost comforting. But now that hum was getting louder, more aggressive, like an angry wasp trapped in a jar. Dr. Veltar was mid-sentence when the first spark jumped across the containment grid. A bright blue flash lit up the lecture hall for just a split second. The professor stopped talking immediately, her crystalline head turning toward the containment area with what Jake was learning to recognize as concern on her alien features. "That should not be happening," she said, her wind chime voice now carrying a note of worry. The second spark was bigger, followed quickly by a third. Jake could smell something burning, that sharp electrical scent like when his grandmother's old toaster finally gave up. Around him, the alien students were getting restless. The insectoid ones started making clicking sounds deep in their throats, while the ethereals began floating higher toward the ceiling. Then the whole containment field collapsed. It didn't fail gradually or shut down in sections like Jake expected from the science fiction movies back home. 1 second there was a shimmering blue barrier holding whatever was inside, and the next second there was nothing but empty air and the acrid smell of fried electronics. What stepped out of the smoking containment area made Jake understand why everyone had been so terrified. The creature was massive, easily the size of a small car, but it moved with the fluid grace of a cat. 6 legs, each ending in claws that looked like they could slice through steel, carried a body covered in what appeared to be black fur. But as Jake watched, that fur began to glow. Patterns of light started racing across the creature's hide, like neon signs come to life. Blues and greens and angry reds painted the alien predator in a display that was both beautiful and absolutely terrifying. The shadow maw's head was the worst part. Jake couldn't see any eyes, just a smooth surface where a face should be, but somehow he knew it was looking at him, at all of them. Its mouth opened, revealing rows of teeth that belonged in a shark's mouth, not on something with legs. Then it shrieked. The sound hit Jake like a physical blow, so loud and alien that his ears immediately started ringing. It was like a mountain lion's scream mixed with the sound of tearing metal and fingernails on a chalkboard. Several of the alien students actually collapsed, their sensitive hearing completely overwhelmed. That's when the real chaos started. Jake had seen panic before. Black Friday sales, fire drills at school, even a small earthquake when he was visiting California. But he'd never seen anything like this. 200 alien beings, each with their own way of moving, all trying to reach the same exits at the same time. The floating ethereals shot toward the ceiling vents like scared birds. The multi-legged arachnids skittered over the backs of slower students, with no regard for who they were stepping on. The large, rock-like lithoids simply bulldozed their way through the crowd, sending smaller aliens flying. Swift River, his 4-armed seatmate, was running on all 6 limbs toward the nearest exit. Dr. Veltar, their normally composed professor, had gone almost completely transparent with fear. Jake could barely see her crystalline form as she pressed herself against the back wall of the lecture hall, as far from the creature as possible. Emergency alarms started blaring, red lights flashing throughout the station. Jake could hear the computerized voice of the station's AI system announcing something about lockdown procedures and emergency response teams, but it was hard to make out over the screaming and the sound of 200 beings trying to escape at once. The shadow maw stood in the center of all this chaos, its bioluminescent patterns now cycling through colors so fast they made Jake's eyes water. It turned its head left and right, that eyeless face somehow tracking the fleeing students. But it didn't chase anyone. It just stood there, claws scraping against the metal floor, those terrible glowing patterns racing across his fur like a living light show. Jake realized he was the only one still sitting down. Everyone else was either running, hiding, or pressed against the walls in terror. But Jake just sat there in his uncomfortable chair, tablet still open on his lap, watching the creature with the same attention he'd given to lectures about plant biology. He found himself tilting his head slightly, trying to figure out what the creature was doing. It wasn't attacking anyone, despite having plenty of targets. It wasn't chasing the fleeing students or trying to break down doors. It was just standing there, and if Jake didn't know better, he'd say it looked confused, almost like it didn't know what to do next. The lecture hall had emptied in less than 2 minutes, leaving behind scattered tablets, overturned chairs, and a lingering smell of alien fear pheromones. Jake could hear security teams shouting in the corridors outside, their heavy boots pounding against metal floors as they rushed toward the xenobiology wing. Someone was yelling orders in Galactic Standard about containment protocols and evacuation procedures. But Jake wasn't paying attention to any of that. He was watching the Shadow Maw. The creature had stopped its light display, the angry reds and aggressive purples fading to a dim blue-green glow across its dark fur. Now it was moving in small, tight circles right where the containment field used to be. Its 6 legs carried it around and around the same 3-foot area, like it was wearing a path in the metal floor. Jake had seen that behavior before. His neighbor back in Ohio, Mrs. Henderson, had an old German shepherd named Rex who did the exact same thing during thunderstorms. The dog would pace in circles in the basement, ears flat against his head, whining softly until the storm passed. Everyone always said Rex was being aggressive and dangerous, but Jake's dad had explained it differently. That dog's not trying to hurt anyone. His father had said during one particularly bad storm, he's scared out of his mind and looking for somewhere safe to hide. The Shadow Maw's ears were flat too. Jake hadn't noticed them at first because they blended perfectly with the creature's head, but now he could see them pressed tight against its skull, just like Rex during those storms. Just like every frightened animal Jake had ever encountered, the creature wasn't hunting. It wasn't stalking prey or testing the room for weaknesses. It was looking for an exit. Every few seconds, the Shadow Maw would stop its pacing and turn toward one of the lecture hall's doors. Its eyeless head would track left and right, and Jake could almost see it calculating distances and obstacles. But every door led to corridors full of running, screaming aliens, and each time the creature would turn away and resume its nervous pacing. "You're scared too, aren't you?" Jake said quietly, not really expecting the creature to understand. The Shadow Maw froze mid-step. That smooth, featureless head turned directly toward Jake, and he felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the creature had definitely heard him. For a long moment, they just looked at each other across the empty lecture hall. The human student still sitting in his uncomfortable chair, and the galactic predator standing perfectly still about 30 feet away. Jake's mind flashed back to a camping trip he'd taken with his uncle in Montana 3 summers ago. They'd been hiking back to their campsite just after sunset when they'd rounded a bend in the trail and come face to face with a mountain lion. His uncle had grabbed Jake's arm and whispered the same advice his grandfather had given him years earlier. Don't run. Don't make yourself look bigger. Don't stare it down. Just stay calm and let it know you're not a threat. The mountain lion had studied them for what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then it had simply walked away, disappearing into the trees like it had never been there at all. Later, his uncle explained that the big cat had probably been just as surprised to see them as they were to see it. Most predators don't want to fight, he'd said around the campfire that night. Fighting means getting hurt, and getting hurt means not being able to hunt or take care of your young. They'd rather avoid trouble altogether. The Shadow Maw was doing the same thing now. Its bioluminescent patterns had shifted to what Jake was starting to recognize as neutral colors, soft blues and pale greens instead of the aggressive reds from earlier. The creature's body language screamed anxiety, not aggression. It reminded Jake of every scared animal he'd ever encountered growing up in rural Ohio. There had been the raccoon family that got trapped in his garage during a winter storm, hissing and showing their teeth until his father opened the door and let them escape into the night. The injured hawk that landed in their backyard, wings spread and screeching at anyone who came close, until the wildlife rescue team arrived with thick gloves and a carrier. Even the neighbor's usually friendly golden retriever, who'd gotten lost during 4th of July fireworks, found cowering under their porch with wild eyes and trembling legs. All of them had looked dangerous to people who didn't know better. All of them had been making threat displays and scary noises. But Jake had learned to look past the noise and bluster to see what was really happening underneath. The Shadow Maw wasn't trying to hunt anyone. It was a scared animal in an unfamiliar place, surrounded by strange smells and sounds, with no idea how to get back to somewhere safe. The light show and the shrieking hadn't been hunting behavior. They'd been the alien equivalent of a frightened dog barking at strangers. Outside in the corridors, Jake could hear security teams setting up their equipment. Soon they'd come charging in with stun weapons and containment nets, probably scaring the creature even more. But for now, it was just Jake and the Shadow Maw, two beings trying to figure each other out in the quiet aftermath of chaos. The creature took a small step toward him, and Jake felt his heart skip a beat. But there was something careful about the movement, almost tentative, like it was asking permission. The station's emergency speakers crackled to life above Jake's head, the mechanical voice of the AI system cutting through the sudden quiet of the empty lecture hall. All personnel in Section 7 Delta, evacuate immediately. Containment breach in progress. Security teams en route. Do not approach the hostile entity. Jake looked up at the nearest speaker, then back at the Shadow Maw, who had turned its head toward the sound as well. The creature's bioluminescent patterns flickered nervously at the loud announcement, shifting from calm blues to slightly more agitated yellows. Hostile entity, Jake muttered under his breath. Right. He'd been called worse things back home. His high school guidance counselor had a whole file about his concerning interest in dangerous wildlife after Jake wrote his senior paper on grizzly bear behavior patterns. His college professors thought he was crazy for wanting to study xenobiology instead of something safe like accounting. Even his own mother worried that he spent too much time hiking alone in the woods behind their house. But his grandfather had been different. The old man had spent 40 years as a park ranger in Yellowstone, and he'd taught Jake everything he knew about reading animal behavior. Some of Jake's earliest memories were walking through the forest with his grandfather, learning to spot the difference between an aggressive animal and a scared one. Most folks see a wild animal acting up and think it wants to hurt them. His grandfather used to say during their long hikes through the Montana wilderness. But 9 times out of 10, that animal is just scared and trying to get away from you. The trick is knowing how to let it know you're not a threat. The evacuation warning repeated, more urgently this time. Jake could hear security teams getting closer, their voices echoing to the corridor outside. They'd be here in a few minutes with stun guns and containment equipment, ready to treat the Shadow Maw like a dangerous criminal instead of frightened animal. Jake made his decision. He stood up slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and calm. The Shadow Maw's head snapped toward him immediately, and those bioluminescent patterns shifted to a brighter yellow with hints of orange around the edges. Not quite panic colors, but definitely alert. Easy, Jake said softly, the same tone he'd used with scare horses and nervous cats back home. I'm not going to hurt you. His grandfather's voice echoed in his memory as Jake took his first step toward the creature. Never approach a wild animal head-on. It looks like a challenge or an attack. Always come at an angle, like you're not really interested in them at all. Keep your body relaxed and your hands visible. And whatever you do, don't stare them down like you're trying to have some kind of contest. Jake angled his approach to come at the Shadow Maw from the side. His eyes focused on a point just past the creature's head, rather than making direct eye contact. He kept his hands loose at his sides and his shoulders relaxed, fighting every instinct that told him to either run away or make himself look bigger and more threatening. The Shadow Maw stopped pacing entirely now, all 6 legs planted firmly on the floor as it watched this strange small being approach. Jake could see the confusion in the creature's body language. Its bioluminescent patterns were cycling through colors he hadn't seen before, cautious greens mixed with curious purples, like it couldn't decide whether to be afraid or interested. Every other being in the lecture hall had either run away screaming or tried to make themselves look big and threatening before fleeing. But this human was doing something completely different. No fear scent, no aggressive posturing, no rapid movements. Just calm, steady confidence. Jake remembered the first time he'd successfully approached a wild deer that had been injured and trapped in their neighbor's fence. It had taken him 20 minutes of slow, patient movement, but eventually the animal had let him get close enough to free its antlers from the wire. His grandfather had been so proud. Animals know when you mean them harm, the old man had explained later, and they know when you don't. It's all about the energy you put out there. 10 feet away from the Shadow Maw now, Jake could see the creature's muscles relaxing slightly. Those angry orange patterns were fading back to curious purples and cautious blues. The creature's head was tilted to one side, studying him with what could only be described as fascination. 5 feet away, and Jake could hear the creatures breathing, deep, steady breaths instead of the quick, panicked panting from earlier. The shadow maw had stopped looking toward the doors entirely, its attention completely focused on this unusual human, who didn't seem to understand how terrifying it was supposed to be. 3 feet away, Jake slowly sat down cross-legged on the cold metal floor, just like he used to do when trying to earn the trust of stray cats in his neighborhood. He kept his hands in his lap, and his voice soft and steady. "Easy there, big guy," he said, using the same gentle tone his grandfather had taught him. "I know you're scared. This place is weird and loud, and everyone was screaming at you, but you're okay now. Nobody's going to hurt you." The shadow maw stared down at him for a long moment, those bioluminescent patterns shifting to the softest blue-green Jake had seen yet. Then, to his amazement, the massive creature slowly lowered itself to the floor as well, folding its 6 legs underneath its body like a cat settling down for a nap. They sat there together in the quiet lecture hall, the human and the galactic predator, both just try to understand each other, while security teams prepare to storm in and ruin everything. The security team came to the lecture hall doors like they were storming a battlefield. Jake heard them before he saw them. Heavy boots, shouted commands, and a distinctive whine of stun weapons charging up. The lead officer was a massive Kronak, his thick gray hide covered in tactical armor that made him look like a walking tank. Behind him came 6 more security personnel from different species, all armed with containment nets, force field generators, and enough firepower to stop a small army. They burst through the main entrance ready for war, expecting to find blood on the walls and maybe some scattered remains of the foolish human student who'd ignored evacuation orders. The Kronak had his stun rifle raised and ready, his small black eyes scanning the lecture hall for signs of the deadly predator they'd been called to contain. What they found instead made all 7 officers stop dead in their tracks. Jake was still sitting cross-legged on the floor, exactly where he'd been for the past 10 minutes, looking completely relaxed and unharmed. Next to him, the supposedly terrifying shadow maw was curled up like the world's largest house cat, its 6 legs tucked neatly under its body, and its head resting on what might have been its version of paws. The creature's bioluminescent patterns were cycling through the softest blues and greens Jake had seen yet, pulsing slowly like a gentle heartbeat. "What in the 7 moons?" the Kronak officer whispered, his deep voice carrying clearly in the sudden silence. The shadow maws had lifted at the sound of new voices, and for a moment Jake worried the creature might get spooked again. But instead of jumping up or displaying aggressive colors, it simply looked at the security team with what appeared to be mild curiosity before settling its head back down. One of its ears twitched in Jake's direction, like it was checking to make sure its new human friend was still there. Dr. Veltar appeared behind the security team, her crystalline form still dimmer than usual, but slowly returning to its normal brightness as she realized there was no immediate danger. Her wind-chime voice was barely above a whisper as she stared at the impossible scene before her. "How?" she asked, the single word carrying all the confusion and amazement she felt. "How are you still alive? How is it not attacking? How is any of this possible?" Jake looked up at his professor and the assembled security team, suddenly aware of how strange this must look to them. From their perspective, he was a fragile little human sitting next to a Class 7 predator that should have torn him apart minutes ago. He could see the disbelief in their faces, the way they kept their weapons ready despite the obviously peaceful situation. "It's not really that complicated," Jake said, shifting slightly to get more comfortable on the hard floor. The movement made the shadow maw's ear twitch again, but the creature didn't seem concerned. "Back home on Earth, we got things a lot scarier than this guy." The security team exchanged glances. The Kronak officer actually laughed, a sound like rocks tumbling down a mountain. "Scarier than shadow maw," he said. "Human, these creatures have wiped out entire colonies. They're apex predators from a death world where nothing else survives." Jake shrugged, reaching out slowly to scratch behind one of the shadow maw's ears. The creature made a sound deep in its chest that reminded him of a cat purring, and its bioluminescent patterns brightened to a happy gold color. "Yeah, but so are grizzly bears," Jake said simply. "And polar bears are twice as big and 3 times as mean. We got great white sharks that can bite a boat in half, venomous snakes that can kill you in minutes, and spiders the size of dinner plates. Not to mention mountain lions, wolves, and alligators that'll drag you underwater and drown you. The security team was staring at him like he'd just claimed to wrestle black holes for fun. Even Dr. Veltar had gone completely still, her crystalline form frozen in what Jake was learning to recognize as deep shock. The thing is, Jake continued, when you grow up around dangerous animals, you learn to read their body language pretty early. You figure out the difference between something that wants to hurt you and something that's just scared and confused. He gestured toward the peacefully resting Shadow Maw, whose patterns had now settled into a steady, gentle blue glow. This guy wasn't hunting anybody. Look at how he was moving when he first got out, pacing in circles, looking for exits, ears flat against his head. That's not predator behavior. That's scared prey behavior. He just wanted to find somewhere safe to hide until things calmed down. Dr. Veltar finally found her voice again, though it still carried that note of amazement. But the threat display, she said. The bioluminescent patterns, the vocalizations, those are classic aggressive behaviors. Sure, Jake agreed. Same way a dog will bark and show its teeth when it's scared. Doesn't mean it wants to fight. It just wants you to back off and leave it alone. Most animals would rather avoid a confrontation than risk getting hurt. The Kronak officer slowly lowered his weapon, though he kept it ready just in case. So what do we do with it now? He asked. Jake looked down at the Shadow Maw, who was now making that contented purring sound more loudly. The creature seemed perfectly happy to stay right where it was, curled up next to its new human friend. Well, Jake said thoughtfully, first someone probably needs to figure out how to get him back home safely, and maybe fix whatever went wrong with your containment system, so this doesn't happen again. Dr. Veltar was already making notes on her digital pad, her crystalline fingers moving quickly across the interface. Schedule emergency seminar, she muttered to herself. Deathworlder survival techniques. Cross-species behavioral analysis. Predator psychology from a human perspective. She looked up at Jake with something that might have been respect. Mr. Thompson, she said, I believe we have much to learn from you.